one. You're going to say welcome. Is that how this works, John Lopez?
This is how this works. Welcome to another episode of Glad You Asked Me on episode number 4. I'm John Lopez, sports photographer.
John, you are more than just a sports photographer. You are a middle school basketball coach. What's your record now?
Our record, everything in one.
But that's your Terminal 23 record. No, that's the opposite of Terminal 23.
We're not talking about that today. See, that's the problem.
I'm skipping the point. Who
are you?
Exactly. I'm Jeff Henderson, footwear designer.
More than a footwear designer, you also, let's see which one. You also eat food at El Posto Acanto in the Lower East Side.
I don't just eat food. I live there. I work there. Do the website. I do everything. Whatever Julio or B need me to do, I'm bussing tables. That is home. Yes. That's what I'm doing there. So,
what are we talking about today?
Today, John, we're going to talk about the last. It's the part of the shoe creation that most people don't know about. The joke is that the shoe starts with the last. First thing that happens is the last, and that is the shoe form. So we're going to go right into it. The shoe form. See these brown wooden pieces here? This is actually the shoe last. So what these are, you know how you have a shoe form that you actually have in the shoe that people get in to sort of like make sure it fits to widen the shoe? Yeah. This is essentially what a shoe starts out with. So back in the day, there would be this wooden form. Actually, still, some people still use wooden forms. You actually build the shoe onto these devices to actually get the shape and everything correct.
Does that account for like bunions and hammer toes?
Counts for everything. You want to get the shoe to fit around anybody's foot. Here's an example of a wingtip. The yellow part right here, this is the last. You can see it kind of sticking out right there. Is that your bunion? Is that where it hurts? That's where it goes. You see the little square toe? That's kind of all how it fits in. So if your last is incorrect, your shoe is going to be incorrect. That's just how it kind of works.
So before we go into more depth, tell me about at what point in your career did you start or continue working on lasts?
So when I first got to Nike, lasts were pretty much set. We didn't work on them. I was probably there for Nike 14 years, and I probably touched 2 lasts where we made changes because we were doing such volume. This company's been around forever. They have their last. You could pick a last, but we weren't really going to develop any new last. It wasn't until I started with Kohan where they were like, oh, you want to change the shape of it? Well, let's just change the last. And I was kind of freaked out, like, whoa, that's like the holy grail. You can't change that. I remember at Nike, I was like, yo, the running shoe is a little narrow. Can we make it wider? Like, no, you got to like get like 20 people to sign off for that. You need the VP, Mark Parker. But at Kohan, we were changing last like left and right. So it was because you wanted the shape of the shoe to be a little different. And the less material you use on a shoe, so if it's straight leather, the more you want that last to be perfect. So you kind of have to make changes to get it to be exactly how you want it to fit, how you want it to look. It's an aesthetic choice as much of it as a performance and fit choice.
Gotcha.
So I didn't get into that till Kohan. Now, like a lot of the projects I work on, we have to work with like the Jones and Bindings of the world, go straight to the factory, and like we're massaging every bit. So here's an example of like the technical call outs of all the parts of a last when people refer to things like toe spring. Here's where you look and see, all right, do you want the shoe to kind of wrap up when you walk? You notice that when you step forward, you want your foot to keep going. If it doesn't keep forward, that's probably flat, so you have less toe spring, so you feel sort of flattened out. Same with heel lift. Like there was a thing called earth shoes where the heel lift was actually reversed, and this actually went backwards, and it felt like you were tipping over backwards. So these are all things. Like one of the things that kind of makes shoes sexy, it's a little secret. This right here is called the rake. It actually pulls in. It actually pulls in on your Achilles, but you'll notice like one of the things that makes women's high heel shoes look good is like it kind of comes in there and accentuates the calf, which you can see right here. You have that shape right there. This cuts in a lot. It may not feel great, but you get that sexy shape. So people actually work from these little details, and they'll actually take this plate and take dimensions to figure out what they want that last form.
So that's what makes me look so good when I'm bowling out at Terminal 23.
You look sexy when you're on your heels and you're trying to like shoot that 3-pointer from like 25-5 instead of pulling up for 10-10 where you're supposed to make that layup. So for example, when you actually design off of a last, here's like kind of old school treatment is like you actually take tape, you tape it on the last, and you draw directly, and that's how you get your shape. A lot of people, when I first started seeing shoe sketches, I would notice that they were really tight. They didn't really look like a shoe. It's because they were drawn directly to the last because they actually take that piece of tape off, flatten it out, and make it what's called a pattern shell. So actually you would cut out this shape that would be your pattern piece, and you would cut out your leathers, your meshes, and everything else to actually fit that shape. So you can see here's an example of a project where you actually take that shape cut it out, and it came from the last. And it may not look like the last now, but it actually was pulled off the last.
Can you tell me a
to
little
kinda
bit
make
about that fabric to the left over there with
that
the little
fabric
red
to the
bits?
left is one of those knit forms that comes from this project that I worked on for the last couple years. Yeah, so I'm sure you recognize that stripe. So using the knit is different than leather because the knit has different properties. So a leather piece that sits on the last will actually take in and kind of fit to the last. Sometimes when you have a material that stretches, it might just keep going. So you have to cut it a little tight to the last, and that's kind of how that form took place.
Now, off air, we were talking a little about how you used to stand in bathtubs with your leather shoes to make sure that the form
I
fit.
didn't. That's not what I did. I'm not that old. I don't want to say I'm that old. Actually, I kind of am that old, but I didn't play that sport. So what they would do with like soccer shoes, because soccer players want their shoes close to the foot, because that's kind of how you handle the ball. They would actually take their kangaroo leather hide shoes and they would soak them in the tub with their shoes on, and then they would let them dry. That way, the shoe would actually fit directly to their foot. So even though the shoe was made on the last, when it dried because of the material, it would exactly fit to their foot. Nowadays, the materials that are synthetic actually already have their shape. They won't conform as much as leather. And actually, you want the last to be perfect so you don't have to go sit in the bathtub with your shoes on anymore. You're welcome. So here's an example of like a last. And what happened, this is a bespoke conversation. So what happens is you take a last that already fits most people, and someone will come in and say, you know what, my left foot like is really tight right here on the shoe. So they actually come in and add material onto the last. You say, oh, my bunion, to your point, it's kind of hurting over here and I need to add a little more material. So they add more material to the last and then they build the shoe around it. So for an individual who has certain fit needs, they actually will modify the last just for them. But it's also, if you want to do this for production for like thousands of pairs of shoes, you want to kind of go in and do the same kind of treatment.
Is it true that they do these kinds of things? Let's take NBA players for example. For Kobe Bryant's shoes.
Yes.
Is it true that he, for his specific shoe that he actually wore himself, did they make those bespoke for him and then they sell one from a basics last to everybody else?
So the reality is, what's kind of scary is they do actually go in, like at Nike, they'll actually mold players' feet and see exactly what the dimensions of their feet are to make sure they fit. The reality is that the shoes now are so well built that for most people, that doesn't really need to happen anymore because most of the shoes actually conform to the shapes of their feet. Every now and again, you'll get a player whose foot is like strange in some way, like all their toes are the same length and it's just weird. No one wants to see it, but it's built that certain way. So they have to actually go in and make a special pair of shoes for them. But for the most part, actually, a lot of shoes now, they fit most people. You have to have something really strange about your foot for you to need something really drastic for a sports company to actually go through and make some changes. What you'll see here, and if you watch episode, I believe that was episode 2, where we talked about the 2D CAD. So you can see here, this is the dimension of the last that kind of fits in. So you have to make sure your last is correct so you can get the dimension of your tooling correct. So it all fits together, so all the pieces fit together. Because if you've ever had a shoe that doesn't work together, here's an example of this shoe is actually built and constructed for the last, but by the time they cut it all out and put it all together, it actually doesn't fit, so it's sort of baggy. So you can imagine that sort of baggy shoe showing up and not fitting well, that's when it doesn't look good. So
Are you wearing those today?
I am not wearing that today. No, John, I'm wearing some random Yeezy 750s that I just happen to have. Thank you to some good people who made sure I didn't walk around barefoot. People are nice to me. Come on now. You're probably wearing you're wearing your walk the dog shoes from like 10 years ago. So I'm not gonna be mad at you, even though they're like some max greatness that you kind of got at some event because that's what you do. Back to what we're talking about, last. So here's an example of they're actually going through and milling out the material. Here's all the shreds. They actually go through and they're drilling out the shapes to get to the last. So while before we talked about one last and how you design off of, they really have to make multiple lasts. So they'll make hundreds of lasts for production because all the shoes need to sit in the last in order to go through manufacturing. Because the last is actually useful for 2 reasons. One is to get the shape of the shoe. So the longer the material sits on the last, like the reason you sat in the bathtub with your soccer shoes on and you want it to conform is that the longer it sits on the shoe, the more that material takes the shape of that last. So you want to actually place it on the last for as long as possible. So one of the examples is that you can tell that really well-made manufactured shoes, they'll actually leave it on the last, put it in the oven, and they'll let it sit on the last for days at a time.
Like so they baking shoes.
They're actually baking because they want that shape to set in on the last, so it's sort of perfect. The reality is when you're doing mass production, the longer you sit on the last, the more time you're spending not sending it off. So cheaper shoes actually don't sit on the last for a long time. And you can see their shape doesn't really take well. But if you go into like high-end leather goods and see like wingtips, you'll notice that shoe probably looks exactly like that last because they let it sit for like a couple days in a warm room where it actually started to take the shape of that last. So getting the shape is actually important. The other reason the last is important, so you see right here, that little hole, that drill is so you can actually put this last drilled onto different components so you can work on different parts of the shoe without actually touching the shoe and damaging the leathers and other materials. So here you can see they're actually getting what's called back part molding. They're actually coming in and trying to get the heel shape of the shoe to be a little close to the last. And this is that part that screw kind of went into that holds the shoe on, but then you can actually go on and put the bottom unit onto the shoe without actually holding it the whole time. So after you get all those components kind of put together, you go through the heat tunnel, you can see the warm air coming off there, the shoes kind of go in, the shoes kind of come out. But the longer that shoe is sitting on that last to keep that perfect shape, the more you'll have that shoe kind of keep its shape.
It's kind of like the toaster in a lot of college diner.
It is pretty much like a toaster. You don't want to necessarily eat what's coming out of it, but it does keep you warm. You actually, and then you get to the factory, and it's like, please step away from their designer because you're going to burn your hand. You're like, ooh, my bad, I'm sorry, but don't put my lunch in there because I'm going to get it warm. But here you can see like shoe on the last, and that's actually kind of how we make shoes happen based on the last.
Wow, that is impressive. And so you start with the last first.
Last comes first. That's
what comes last?
What comes last? You put it in a box with some paper and ship it off. I guess that's it. I don't know.
Boom. So there goes another episode of Glad You Asked. What can we look forward to next?
I don't even know. We're going to get to it. But I think the big thing is if you have any questions, hit us up at yo@gladyouasked.today. You'll see that in your notes if I said it too fast. I'll say it slow again. yo@gladyouasked. Asked. My mother's going to be proud of me when I say it correctly. Asked today. Again, check the notes. And that's where we are.
There you go. We'll see you next time.